We will be starting Growing Citrus webinar at 6:05. For those who are just entering, we will be starting our program on growing citrus at 6:05. Welcome to our program tonight on growing citrus. This program is co-sponsored by the Contra Costa Libraries and the UC Master Gardeners. The event will be recorded for educational and promotional use by the University of California, and the recorded presentation will be available on YouTube for you to view later. All participants will be muted and you will have your video turned off during the presentation. Closed caption is available tonight and when accessing the recording on YouTube. Please use the Q&A box to post your questions, not the chat box, please. And questions will be addressed at designated times during the presentation. We'll stop briefly in the middle to take a few questions on material that has just been covered and a longer Q&A session at the end. We also tonight are very thrilled to have two master gardeners from our help desk, Elaine Sills and Susan Heckley, who will be behind the scenes answering the questions. We're anticipating a lot of questions on citrus since it's such a popular topic. Also on live stream, we have Lori Palmquist, and she will be answering questions on live stream. So you need to put your questions in the comment box if you're viewing on live stream tonight. Our mission to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscaping practices to the residents of Contra Costa County, and that's you. Tonight, our speaker is Robyn Barker. Robyn became a Master Gardener volunteer in 2017 and has since logged almost 1,900 hours in a variety of activities, including the help desk, plant sales, volunteer support, new volunteer training, as well as the Speakers Bureau, such as this evening. She's currently serving her second year on the executive leadership team and helping develop its strategic plan and mentoring other project leaders. She loves growing citrus and looks forward to sharing her experience with you tonight. Robyn?
Thank you, Karen, for your kind introduction. And I'm looking forward to this presentation tonight about growing citrus. I've divided the presentation into 5 pieces. We'll first talk a little bit about what is citrus, then how to select your citrus, putting it in the ground or putting it in a container, planting it and putting it on its way. And then we'll take a brief break for some questions, and then we'll move on and talk about caring and managing your citrus and what to do when problems arise. First thing I'd like to do is learn a little bit about you. And so we put together a brief poll that should just take you a minute or two so that I can find out a little bit about your experience with citrus.
Okay, we're launching the poll, Robyn. Okay, people are answering. Let's see. We have over 300 viewers so far this evening, so I'm going to give it a few minutes for everybody to get their answer in, and then I'll share the answers. Still coming in. Okay, we're settling in here. Looks like the answer that's most popular is that everyone has 1 to 5 citrus plants. So I'm expecting a lot of interest and a lot of questions tonight.
Yes, we've got some experienced group here today.
Okay.
But it looks like people have room maybe for another 1 or 2 in their yards. So
yeah. Okay, you can hit the stop sharing button on your screen if it's still up for the viewers, and we will continue.
If you have been to a Master Gardener talk, this slide is likely to be familiar to you. I'm starting with it tonight because these concepts underlie everything I'm going to be talking about. We refer to these foundations as the structure of good cultural care. Number 1 is soil. Soil is the basis for a healthy garden. It is home to an entire system of living things. Fungi, bacteria, earthworms, plant roots, keep it healthy. Number 2 is water. Consistent moisture in the soil is key. We all know that too much or too little water can be dangerous for plants. Number 3 is aeration. Many people underappreciate the importance of the air in our soil. And yet, without the pore spaces in the soil, which allow the plant roots to obtain oxygen and the living things that live in the soil to breathe, the plants will not survive. So take care of these pore spaces. Number 4 is the sun. Last but not least, energy from the sun is a driver for plant growth. Just as for water, though, too much or too little sun can cause problems. In the larger context, soil and air temperatures which are also determined by the sun, are critical for plant health. What is citrus? Citrus trees are subtropical, originally from Asia. What does subtropical mean? Typically, citrus plants grow in a wide band of land above and below the equator. Contra Costa County is actually not within that band. We're outside of it and north of any commercial growing area in California. But we can grow citrus here because of our warm offshore ocean currents. Citrus are evergreen. Their leaves drop about every 1 to 2 years, but they don't drop off all at once or in the winter. Actually, during the winter, they instead store food for the plant. They may drop off at a higher rate, or you may notice that they drop off at a higher rate when the tree is blooming. Another vital part of citrus plants are their roots. Citrus plants remain close to the surface and may extend quite a distance from the trunk, as much as 2 times the width of the canopy. In citrus in pots, the roots are contained, and this may cause the tree to be smaller than it would be if it were planted in the ground. Citrus roots are acutely sensitive to moisture levels. Citrus flowers are perfect. Yes, I know all flowers are wonderful, but this is not what I'm talking about. Citrus flowers are perfect in that they have both male and female parts. So most citrus are self-pollinating. Pollinators like butterflies, hummingbirds, and bees are important, but not necessary. And you mostly don't need to have more than one variety of tree, although depending on the variety, this may not be the case. We frequently plant our citrus for their fruit, which we eat, but we don't harvest and plant the seeds. The problem is those seeds will not produce the same plant that the fruit that we're taking them is from. They will plant whatever provided the pollen or the male part of that equation. And so you may end up with something that doesn't taste very good. So in order to guarantee that the variety of the tree is what we want, we plant juvenile trees instead. If you select varieties that ripen at different times, you can be harvesting fruit almost year-round. The most important factor that determines when fruits ripen and are ready for harvest is total heat. In order to get sweet fruit with low acidity, your trees need heat in the summer to develop sugar and lower winter temperatures to drop the acid levels. Varieties will have different heat requirements and cold tolerances. Ripening periods will vary from year to year, depending on the weather. Not all citrus comes in the Trix varieties of lemon yellow and orange. These plants are part of the citrus family too. This one over here on the left is a curry leaf plant. The bumpy fruit in the middle is from the Thai lime tree. Its fruit actually doesn't taste very good. The rind is very thick and the fruit inside the middle is bitter. But the leaves are wonderful in your cooking. Up here at the top right is a kumquat. Its fruit are actually no bigger than your thumb. And talking about the hand parts, well, here we have a Buddha hand down here, which is probably more ornamental. My favorite is the Meyer lemon. When given protection during very cold winters, Meyer lemon is the most dependable citrus for thriving in Contra Costa County. Thought to be a cross between a lemon and a mandarin orange or tangerine, its fruit is the rich orange-yellow color. It has thinner skin and less acidic pulp and juice than lemons commonly found in the supermarket. The Meyer lemons are not all the same, though. I found, much to my surprise, that I'm very lucky that my Meyer lemon has almost no thorns and no seeds. But some Meyer lemon trees have thorns and seeds or any iteration of all of that. Since the 1970s, the only variety available has been an improved Meyer lemon. So how do you select your citrus? Always buy your citrus trees from local reputable nurseries. And buy them young. Younger trees that have not begun to bear usually transplant more easily and are less expensive than larger trees. Choose a healthy looking plant that has foliage with a strong uniform color, green, no blemishes or nicks on the bark, and fairly symmetrical branching and no obvious pet damage. Tilt your plant on its side and check underneath the pot. You don't want a plant that has roots protruding from the container because it's probably been in that container too long and may not transplant as successfully. Whatever roots you do see should be pliable and an intense orange color. Like many commercially grown fruit trees, citrus trees are frequently what's called a scion, and it's grafted on to something called the rootstock. The scion is a shoot or twig from the previous year's growth of the desired variety. And this is how we get around the fact that we can't plant the seeds. It is grafted on, see this graft union here, onto something called rootstock. And rootstock will provide us qualities that may not exist within the scion itself. It may give us enhance our disease tolerance, help us with cold hardiness, be adapted to the local soil. And it also, to some degree, helps with, helps to determine the ultimate size of your tree. So you may, when you go to purchase your tree, find something that's labeled dwarf or semi-dwarf. Unfortunately, that's not a fixed standard, but the rootstock itself is designed or should produce a tree that's somewhat smaller, but still may be somewhat larger. Now, the rootstock can produce and may produce fruit in certain situations, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But usually the fruit that it produces is not very good. It's typically bitter or very pithy. Watch out where your graft union is. Make sure that it's located far enough above the soil to prevent any root disease problems. Citrus trees at nurseries will typically have a tag with information about the plant. Look for information about recommended climate zone or hardiness zone. As discussed before, citrus varieties have different heat preferences and cold tolerances. The tag may refer to a sunset climate zone or a USDA hardiness zone. You can find what the sunset climate zone where you live online or in a book that you can find at the library, the Sunset Gardening book. Hardiness zones are based on average minimum winter temperatures and are set in 10-degree increments. They are published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You can find maps of them online, and I have a map here that I've shown here of the southwestern United States. Or you can input your zip code to find out which zone you're in. This one, it's hard to read, shows that it's from hardiness zone 9. And you can see, if you have a magnifying glass, that our area is good for a hardiness zone 9. Other sources of info, your microclimate can be very important. So for your ultimate success with your citrus trees. So it's worthwhile also to walk around your neighborhood and see what citrus trees are doing well. What are your neighbors growing and how do they look? Also, take advantage of personnel at your local nursery and ask them questions about which variety they recommend for the site that you want to put your tree in. Generally, the best time of year to plant citrus is in the spring after the danger of frost has passed. Trees planted in the spring will have more time to grow and will withstand the cold weather of their first winter better than trees planted later in the year. But summertime winter weather conditions in your location are important too. If you live in an inland area where the weather is particularly hot in the summer, you'll need to balance the risk of freezing against the heat resilience of your tree. Trees that don't have an established root structure may have a hard time keeping your tree hydrated in the heat. So if you live in an area that has very hot weather, fall may be a better time for planting. Fall is also okay if your region is frost-free. Find a place in your garden or on your patio or deck that gets at least 6 hours of sunlight and is protected from strong winds. Avoid areas that can trap cold air, such as a fence at the base of a slope. South and west facing areas of your home or outside your home will typically be the warmest with the most consistent sun. They also may retain heat overnight, which can be helpful if your evenings are very cool. But note that trees set in very warm areas of your property, especially those in containers, will be more vulnerable to drying out or sunburn. The choice of whether to grow your citrus tree in the ground or in a container will depend on whether you have an appropriate location on your property. Citrus trees can do well in containers, so you have the option to grow citrus even if you don't have a good place to plant it in the ground. But first, let's talk about planting citrus in the ground. What's a good space for citrus in the ground? We've already talked about making sure you have a location with at least 6 hours of sunlight and one that is not located in a cold air trap. We've also talked about citrus's wide spreading shallow roots. You will need to allow enough space for the tree to grow to its mature size. You may be looking at least 6 to 8 inches, 8 feet from buildings, driveways, and walkways. Avoid planting citrus trees also next to any other plants you have that have aggressive rooting systems. Citrus trees prefer well-drained loam or sandy loam soil, but with proper irrigation, they can do well in clay soils. If your soil is clay, though, you should perform a drainage test at your preferred spot. Dig a hole at least 1 foot deep and fill it with water. That water should drain out fairly quickly. So what you want to do is fill it up again. Wait for the water to drain out of the hole. All of the water should be drained by the next day. If water remains in the hole, then you'll need to plant your tree above the soil in a raised bed or on a gently sloping mound of soil. Unlike in this picture, planting a citrus tree in a lawn is not recommended. Lawn watering, except in sandy soil, is too frequent and too shallow for a citrus tree, increasing the risk of root rot. If the lawn is the only space available, remove the turf in a 3 to 5 foot circle surrounding the tree to remove competition from turf roots for water or nutrients. You will also need to adjust your watering system because you will need to have a separate watering system for the tree itself. Removing the turf also helps because it protects the tree from any damage that may come from, lawn mowing or weed whacking activities. In any event, the tree's canopy will eventually shade out any turf. So how do you plant in the ground? Dig a hole much wider than the ball of the tree. In general, the hole should be about as deep as the root ball and about twice its diameter. Adjust the depth of the hole so that the top of the surface of the root ball is about 1 inch above the soil surface. You want to plant the tree proud so that the root ball is sticking up a little bit. Then you'll fill the area surrounding the ball to the top, but leaving again the top surface of your root ball exposed. Don't amend the soil. Use the soil you removed when you dug the hole. If you put in different soil, you may discourage the roots from spreading into the surrounding soil. You'll want to water your tree immediately after planting and make sure you keep your root ball moist until the roots grow out into the surrounding soil. The surface roots concentrated at the outside of the root ball may die if they dry out. You also want to be watering the soil around there so that the roots will be encouraged to spread into the surrounding soil in order to adjust to its new location. Remove the stakes supporting your tree so that the true trunk and root growth will be encouraged to support the tree. If you are concerned about high winds and stability in the area, you can tether the tree to 2 stakes set perpendicular to the direction of the wind about 8 inches out. Make sure, though, that your tethers are loose and padded so that they don't damage the bark, and be prepared to remove them as the tree grows. Tethers that are too tight or left on too long can choke the tree. You will also be wanting to set up your irrigation, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and covering the soil around the tree with some type of mulch, bark, straw, but not too close. You want to leave at least 12 inches from the trunk itself, because you don't want to have your mulch up against the trunk. Perhaps you've decided instead to plant your citrus tree in a container. Any 16 to 24 inch pot will do. Terracotta, plastic, stone, ceramic, a half wine barrel, all are good choices. You can even use a stock tank. The pot should be large enough to accommodate several inches of root growth around the original root ball. Be conscious of the interplay of sunlight in your location and the material that you've selected for your pot. If your preferred location gets a lot of afternoon sun, be careful about using a dark-colored ceramic pot or a metal pot. The sun can heat up the pot material and the soil within and potentially bake your roots. Terracotta presents its special difficulties as well because it's a very porous material and the soil within is likely to dry out more quickly than in other types of containers. The real risk, though, is drainage. Make sure the pot you select drains well. Add holes if there aren't enough. The roots don't like to stay wet. Too much moisture can harm your tree. Selecting the soil for your pot. Actually, this is mislabeled a bit because these mixtures are not soil per se. They're mostly a mixture of forest products. Some potting mixes do contain minerals, like would be in your soil, but most do not. You want to select a commercially available citrus potting mix. You want a potting mix that will allow for adequate drainage and promote healthy root growth. You can use an all-purpose potting soil mix, but you want to make sure that it is lightweight and drains well. If it contains a large proportion of dense absorbent material, you want to mix in some perlite, fine bark, or cocoa fibers. Cactus and succulent potting mix is also a good choice, although check to see if they contain a lot of sand. If so, you may want to add lighter materials in order to make sure that you're preserving your pore spaces and that your roots can breathe. So now you're ready to plant your tree in a pot. You can add some mesh across the bottom of the pot to stop the soil from draining out, but do not add a layer of pebbles or gravel to the bottom of the pot. These can actually form like a concrete and interfere with good drainage. To get your plant out of its pot, hold the trunk at the base and gently pull it out. Sometimes it's helpful to have another person give you a hand with this process. If needs be, you can gently slice the pot on one side to loosen it. Try to disturb your root ball as little as possible. Place your tree in the center of the pot and check the soil line. You'll want to add soil at the bottom of the pot so that the root ball sits where the top is about 2 inches below the rim of the pot. Remember your grafting union, it should be well above the soil line. Add soil until it's 1 inch below the top of the root ball. Remove your stake again. Trees need to sway freely in the wind in order to grow stronger trunks and roots. If you're going to add an irrigation line, remember you will be irrigating the soil, not the plant. So make sure that the water line is well away from your trunk. You'll want to again water your tree after planting, and then check your plant the next day and add any soil if it's needed. Again, as with your tree in the ground, you may want to add some mulch to the top of the soil to keep it cool and to prevent it from drying out too quickly. Potted trees require repotting every 2 to 3 years, or when the roots begin growing out of the drainage holes. The best time to repot your tree is in the spring, before its heavy growth period, so that it has time to establish itself in the new container. Select a container that's one size bigger than its existing container. If you have a 5-inch container, a 7-inch, from a 7-inch maybe to or a 5-gallon to a 7-gallon, and a 7-gallon to a 15-gallon. Fill your new pot 1/4 full with a potting soil similar to the type used in the old container. Water the potting mixture until it's evenly moist and the excess just begins to drain from the bottom. The process of planting is similar to the first time you planted your plant, except that you will need to examine the roots carefully. If any are completely encircling the root ball, you'll need to slice through those roots with a clean, sharp knife. Otherwise, those roots may constrict the root ball as they grow and cause the tree to die. You'll want to remove any dead root material. The sun's heat can damage the bark of young trees if it is not shaded by foliage. It can burn and kill the bark, as you can see it did on this tree on the left. The white part that's actually painted is the wood underneath the bark. The bark is the green area to the sides. This poor tree is going to be suffering because it's not getting as many water and nutrients up from its roots, which would be traveling in the root because it has this damage. So to protect trees from sunburn, which is what killed the bark in that area, you want to paint the trunk with whitewash or a white flat, not enamel, interior latex paint that you've mixed with an equal amount of water. I think I've reached the place that I wanted to pause to take a question or two between selecting and planting our citrus, and we'll be talking a little bit more about care and maintenance and any pest and disease questions. But I would love to take a drink of water and listen to a question or two about the topics I've covered. Oh dear, I can't hear you, Karen. Are you muted?
Thanks, Robyn.
I thought, oh my gosh, it's something wrong with my computer.
No. I was reading through all the questions, and we do have quite a few, and the usual suspects about leaves and so forth. We're going to take about 5 questions now. I know the master gardeners behind the scenes, Susan and Elaine, have been typing answers. But let's take some questions on some material you just covered. And one is, what kind of mesh should we put under pots instead of the pebbles?
I would look for something that is, you can use, chicken wire, or they sell mesh at the store, but you want something that is, going to easily allow drainage. but will keep the soil as much as possible within your pot. But there are a number of products that are out there now.
Okay. This viewer has a dwarf mandarin orange tree in a spot that's been there for about 5 years. It gets 4 hours of sun. The leaves are nice, but through the years, it's only had 1 to 3 fruits. The tree has sunken about 12 inches. It looks like they used compost and some other things that have decomposed. And an arborist suggested that this tree owner move it to a more sunny location and use native soil. What would your recommendation be?
I think that sounds good to me. I'm constantly moving my plants around in my garden. And if it's not happy in its present location, which it sounds like it isn't, if it's only given you 1 or 2 fruit, and I don't know, what the leaves look like, whether it's suffering from being deep underground, and the root structure may not have actually moved into the outside soil much. So I don't know, does Susan and Elaine have any thoughts on that?
They're
busy.
Yeah, let's come back to them at the end, because we have several questions on planting. So here's another one. My Meyer lemon was planted in a clay dirt spot in the spring, and it's just started growing a handful of lemons. However, the leaves are, of course, very yellow instead of green. Can this be due to drainage issues or not enough water? So this is the leaf question we were expecting.
Yes, very much so. What's interesting is the location of our garden in Walnut Creek. The soil there was very compacted and it's very clay-like. And when the garden was put in, they actually had a post hole digger that came in and dug holes for each one of the fruit trees. And then when it came time to plant the fruit trees, an expert came in and said, look, if you put those trees inside those holes, it's going to basically be an undrainable pot and they're not going to survive. So they ended up planting all of those trees above the level of the soil, and then, creating mounds, just like I'd said, and the trees have done beautifully.
Great. So Jennifer has a mature citrus tree going next to her house. And besides putting mulch around the trunk, is there anything else that can be done to get rid of whitefly and yellow tips on the leaves?
Well, we are going to talk about whitefly and yellow tips on the leaves as we move into the rest of our conversation. So,
great.
And some of that, is just, you have to have a certain capacity for adventure in your plants. So the ones that you see on the gardens are sometimes things that are put there just for show. So, but we'll try to see if we can keep that down.
Okay, one more question and then we'll move on here. My semi-dwarf Barris lime tree is growing new delicate baby leaves and shoots that are just shriveling in the heat. Is there anything I can do to save them?
So the entire tree or the new shoots? I think we're all looking at adjusting. And that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about in the latter part of the program is our watering. And watering is especially tricky this year because really it has just been very hot. And I think all of our trees and plants are suffering. But we just can't stick to the watering schedule that has sometimes worked in prior years. We're going to have to be keeping a closer eye on the needs of the plants in order to help it out as much as possible.
Thanks, Robyn. Let's move on, and we'll take quite a few more questions at the end. And in the meantime, Susan and Elaine are working to answer a lot of your questions behind the scenes.
Okay, and so without further ado, I'll take my last sip of water and move into watering. This is probably hands down the most tricky question, and the thing that needs to be addressed the most carefully with citrus trees. There are many options for watering citrus, but remember, you want to water the soil, not the plant. And remember also those roots spread in a wide circle, possibly twice the distance of the canopy. There are a number of choices for irrigation. One of the advantages of irrigation is that you're putting it on a regular timer, so you're not, or so you have the capability of putting it on a regular timer so that you're not depending on what could be a forgetful or busy schedule that could cause you to forget to address the watering needs of your citrus. You can see here we've got some drip irrigation. We've got an emitter here. We've got a soaker hose. Remember, you're watering the soil, so you don't want it too close to the trunk, and you're going to be wanting to put it in a relatively wide circle around your tree because your tree has very wide roots. The trick with citrus is to water deeply and less frequently. Even if because it wants enough water, but not too much. It's going to be very picky about its watering schedule. So even if the surface of your citrus tree the soil underneath your citrus tree is dry, the soil at the roots may be saturated. So what you want to do is be sure to check the soil moisture 6 to 12 inches below the soil to determine if it is time to water. The best option for checking your soil moisture is with your hands. And that's why I have this little hand over here. Use a trowel or a probe to dig one or more small holes around the periphery of your tree. If the soil is dry and friable down there, it's time to water. If the soil clumps in your hand, then it's wet. You can do this also with a soil moisture meter, which are easily found online or at your local nursery. I use mine frequently, but you have to be careful when using a moisture meter to make sure that it is properly calibrated. That that you would do that by putting it in soil that you know that's wet to make sure that it's showing up as wet, and soil that you know is dry to make sure that it is registering properly. Young trees in the ground are usually watered every 5 to 10 days in June through September, but it has been very hot lately, so you really do need to check at least once or twice a week what the moisture is underneath your tree to determine if it is adequately moist down there, because you never want to let the root system dry out, but you also don't want it sitting in, too wet soil. For a potted citrus, the same type of schedule is important, works. You want once or twice a week to check the soil and to see how wet it is, and when you do water, you want to check to make sure that not too much water is leaking out of the base of the tree, because that may be leaching nutrients from the soil. A wilted tree that doesn't perk up after a watering may indicate soggy roots and excessive watering. Keep an eye on leaves too. Yellow cup leaves may also indicate too much water. And again, overwatering is a common mistake with many potted plants. You may notice yellow leaves, which may be symptomatic of deficiencies of nutrients in the soil, if the excessive water has been leaching out through the bottom of your container. If you do hand watering, make sure especially if you have clay-like soil, the water may run off if you dump like this big spray of water that's shown here onto your tree. You need to water deeply and then perhaps come back an hour later and water again more as the soil becomes used to being damp and is able to take in more water. The advantage of hand watering, of course, is that you're for sure going out and checking on your tree and having a good look at it, and not just relying on the timer and the watering irrigation system. The next issue is fertilization. Citrus trees planted in the ground require regular fertilization with nitrogen scattered under the canopy and past the drip line. Typically, most other nutrients are available in sufficient amounts in the clay loam soil that is typical in Contra Costa County. If your soil is sandy, closer to the delta, or if your citrus is in a pot, you may need to add other micronutrients. They can be applied effectively via one of the many available foliar sprays or drenches. Foliar means leaves, so a foliar spray is sprayed on the leaves. Some sprays, though, may affect the appearance of your fruit, and so you may choose instead to apply the nutritional minerals to the root zone via a drench. Nitrogen should be applied in January or February, just prior to bloom. Trees frequently look pale at the end of the winter. If you choose not to apply all your nitrogen at once, you can also apply it in a second application in May and perhaps a third in June. Avoid late season fertilization, though, as it may affect fruit quality, delay the fruit coloring, or make the rind rough. If the flush of young leaves that is facilitated by fertilizing with nitrogen, can make the tree more vulnerable to freeze damage. Citrus leaves are good indicators of nutrient deficiencies. As we've talked about, foliage is pale overall when nitrogen is deficient, but pale leaves may also be an indicator of other problems as we've discussed: poor watering practices, adverse soil conditions, or unhealthy roots. Leaf yellowing is common in the winter months when it rains a lot because of a leaching activity as well. If you're noticing your yellow leaves in March and you haven't yet fertilized, then the cause is probably nitrogen deficiency. Other times of the year, it may be worthwhile to check the soil moisture to make sure that your root area is not too saturated. The next picture is of an iron deficiency. You see the yellowing between the smaller, darker green veins. A magnesium deficiency will show up as a leaf yellowing that begins at the edges and at the leaf tip and moves inward, leaving a somewhat V-shaped dark green patch of foliage near the leaf base. Up here you see yellow leaves, yellow curling leaves with their edges not curled but bent downward at the tip. And finally, you can see a zinc deficiency, which shows up as these larger pale patches between the veins. And zinc is actually one nutrient that is deficient in Contra Costa soil. During the first 3 to 4 years after planting a citrus tree, you will expect light fruit production. These are known as the non-bearing years. And it's nothing to worry about because you want your fruit tree, especially one in the ground, to use its primary energy to create a good solid set of roots and a strong trunk and branch network. Once your fruit starts bearing, it will follow a seasonal cycle that begins in the spring with the enlargement of flower buds that produce the current season's crop. In California, citrus trees usually have several growth flushes in spring, summer, and fall. Each growth flush can produce flowers and set fruit. But in most varieties, the spring flush is going to be the most productive. Fruit thinning is usually not required. After the petals fall from citrus bloom, you may see these clusters of fruit, and you may worry, oh my gosh, how can I possibly fit 4 nice lemons in that little tiny area? However, most of those small pea-sized fruit are going to drop, in fairly short order, no more than 1 month after they've appeared. This is not anything to worry about. This is the tree is managing its fruit load. Further on, if you have larger golf ball sized fruit dropping, it may be that conditions exist that limit growth, like the excess heat that we've been having, lack of soil moisture, or bad weather generally. Citrus fruit is typically not ready to harvest for sometimes quite a long time after the bloom, sometimes up to 8 to 16 months. Once your fruit matures, though, pick it. You can leave your mature fruit on the trees, but the quality typically doesn't improve over time. Pruning is not required to keep citrus productive. You want to prune to shape your tree, remove any twiggy growth, and for the natural reasons that you normally do your pruning, to get rid of any dead wood or weak branches from, deranged. There's some saying with dead, deranged, or something. So any crossing, broken, shaded branches. You may also want to bring the level of your tree up a little bit if it's in the ground, so that you can see what's going on with the trunk as it hits the ground, and make sure that the mulch stays far away, and to keep things fairly tidy around there. Sometimes, though, you will see a very vigorous branch that shoot out and give the tree kind of a wild appearance. Those branches they're kind of like water sprouts that you will see on other fruit trees. And I would encourage you to cut them off at the base, because they are unlikely to be particularly productive of fruit. If you head them, cut them so that they're even with the outside of the tree, sometimes they will subdivide. And so you can create a whole area of your tree that isn't going to give you any fruit, and that isn't something that you want. Other branches to watch out for that can also be very, very vigorous and grow quickly are branches that come off the rootstock. So look carefully, and that's another reason to bring up the level of your branches so that you can see, and make sure that you don't have any branches that are coming off the rootstock, because those are unlikely to give you any fruit that you want. And those should be cut off where they come out from the tree. Citrus can also be grown as a sheared hedge, or here, I have a picture of an espalier tree. And so you can train your citrus in this way as well. If you do prune, though, try to prune just prior to bloom or after the fruit has set, so that the tree can properly adjust its fruit load before the fruit drop. The best time of the year is late spring or summer. Avoid late season pruning. Like late season fertilizing, it can stimulate excessive tender growth that is likely to be injured by any frost. And speaking of frost, we also talked about citrus trees and their different cold tolerance. Most will need protection if our temperatures fall below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. New foliage is most at risk, so that's why you want to stop fertilizing and pruning after midsummer. The damage that frost does is it causes the vegetation to wither and turn a dark brown or black. Leaves, green wood, and fruit are more frost sensitive than hardwood. Ripe fruit is more cold tolerant than green fruit because the sugars in the juice act like antifreeze and lower the temperature at which it will freeze. Ice crystals, nonetheless, if it does freeze, ice crystals will form in the citrus fruit, or can form in the citrus fruit, and they will cause the juice vesicles inside the pulp to rupture, and the fruit will then dry out. You can eat your frost-damaged fruit right after a freeze, but don't wait, as the fruit is likely to quickly decay and become inedible. The best course of action is to pick your fruit before a predicted freeze, because it will not only save the fruit, but will help protect the entire tree as well, because a tree with fruit is more susceptible to freeze damage than one without it. If you hear that a cold front is coming, get ready. If your tree is in the ground, water 2 to 3 days before the freeze comes, because making sure that the garden soil is moist, the water will give off heat, and this can help protect the tree from freezing. Make sure that your soil is good drainage. If your soil does drain particularly well, you can also run a sprinkler system slowly or irrigate it through furrows through the night. Another option is, in case you were wondering, why is this a mistake? Does this woman, why does she have a Christmas tree? Well, actually, old-fashioned heat-producing holiday lights or an old school 100-watt light bulb that's rated for outside use can be used to warm up the temperature around your citrus tree. Be careful, though, that your hot bulbs don't come into direct contact with your leaves, because the leaves may scorch. You can use frost cover blankets and drape them over your trees and bring them down to the ground to trap daytime heat. You can also wrap your trunk and branches with insulating material such as palm fronds, cardboard, corn stalks, fiberglass. During wet weather, you may cover all of this with a layer of plastic, but plastic alone is not going to provide adequate insulation. And you'll want to make sure that you remove the plastic the next day when the sun comes out, because it can get way too hot underneath the plastic and burn your tree. If you have space, of course, you could overwinter your citrus tree indoors and avoid the frost problem completely. Make sure, though, once the danger of frost is past, to gradually move your tree back to full sun. If your tree does have frost damage, don't prune away the dead wood or cut down your tree right away, even if it looks very dead. Wait until the spring flush of growth in order to assess the full extent of the damage and to allow the trees to recover during warm weather. Once your new foliage is fully in, then you will be better able to tell what limbs are dead and what ones just look dead. If you've had a tree that's been affected by frost, though, postpone any heavy pruning on that tree for a year or so to give that tree full time to regain its canopy. And it may not be particularly productive of fruit as it recovers from its bad experience. So who's more susceptible? Different types of citrus, as I said, vary in cold hardiness. The table over here shows a few varieties and their susceptibility. Those with an H have high susceptibility. Those with an L have a low susceptibility, and those, of course, with an M are in the middle. So you can see mandarins and kumquats are the most cold hardy varieties of citrus trees. Mature mandarin trees, for example, can tolerate temperatures down to 20 degrees for 4 hours before incurring serious damage to their wood. Meyer lemons are less susceptible than lemons. And this is because of the impact of their parentage of having the mandarins, which have a low susceptibility to frost. I have a mandarin, a Meyer lemon, and a Thai lime tree. During last winter's cold snap, I covered the trees, but it wasn't enough for the Thai lime, which started this spring with just a pile of dead leaves around the base of it and almost no leaves on the tree. I was horrified and ashamed at failing my poor tree. I am a master gardener after all. But the tree has actually come back very nicely. I've lost no branches, and it has now a full crown of leaves on all of its branches. It hasn't produced any fruit yet, but the fruit was nasty anyway. I was much more interested in the leaves. Remember, other factors can influence how affected your tree is by cold temperatures, including how long the cold snap lasts, and greater damage can occur if you have a wind or something that makes it much colder for the tree. And also be careful about the location. Remember, if your tree is in an area where cold air is trapped, then it is much more likely to incur damage. Compared to other fruit trees grown in the home garden, citrus trees have relatively few pest and disease problems if they receive good cultural care. Citrus is susceptible to whiteflies, aphids, and scale. These insect pests generally damage leaves and, in the case of scale, branches. A forceful spray of water will dislodge aphids and whiteflies. In the case of scale, though, you may need to remove any heavily infected branches. These pests may cause some damage, but are unlikely to kill the tree. All aphids, whiteflies, and scale have many natural predators, so it's best not to spray with a broad spectrum insecticide, which may also kill beneficial insects who will be looking to eat these bad actors. Note that numerous species of mites can occur on plants. Mites are very small, about 1/150th to 1/100th of an inch. Different mites generally affect different citrus. They may discolor the fruit and cause deformed blossoms or foliage. Damage is usually the most severe in hot, dusty conditions like the weather we've been having, and on any water-stressed plants. Again, like the aphids, mites have many predators or natural enemies. So to improve the effectiveness of your biological control, you want to minimize dust and control ants, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Avoid application of broad-spectrum persistent insecticides or miticides. The best prevention is good cultural care. Water plants sufficiently to avoid drought stress, which can increase your mite population and your mite damage. Citrus leaf miner was one of the first pests on my new citrus trees, which is not surprising because this pest likes young, tender, shiny leaves. The larvae mine inside the lower or upper surface of leaves, leaving a whitish trail. The mining can cause foliage to curl and look distorted. The larvae, though, are actually inside the leaves, so cannot be brushed or washed off. Look out for this pest when your leaves are producing new leaves, when your trees are producing new leaves. Citrus leaf miner can only survive as a larva in the tender, young, shiny leaf flush. Mature trees are unlikely to be heavily affected by this pest because their proportion of mature foliage is much higher. It is more likely to affect younger trees and may interfere with its growth or fruit production. However, though, even young trees with heavy leaf miner populations are unlikely to die. What to do? Do not prune off the leaves damaged by the citrus leaf miner, since undamaged areas of the leaves will continue to produce fruit for the tree. And it's already maybe suffering because the way that the leaves are twisted means that they're not being as productive of the food as you would want them to be. And again, check your cultural care. How's your water and fertilizing? And it's not time to reach for insecticides because they're not going to do much help with this pest. One of the things you can do, and you should do with your citrus tree, is to observe proper ant control. Ant control is really helpful for managing your insect pests. Ants farm aphids and scale. They feed on the honeydew that these sap-sucking insects produce. And they also protect the aphids and the other insects from the predators. Ants can be prevented from climbing up your citrus tree by applying a sticky barrier like Tanglefoot. I'm not endorsing it. Any brand of sticky insect repellent will do. Do not put your sticky insect repellent on the bark because it can damage it and interfere with its actions helping your tree. What you want to do is wrap a strip of heavy paper or other protective material around the trunk and then apply Tanglefoot to the outside surface. I use reversed duct tape, which sticks to itself so that it makes it easier, and it also is a little stretchy. I put the sticky side to the outside, and then I layer it over a layer of cotton wool, which fills in the gaps since the bark frequently is rough, and ants are very good at finding tunnels and ways underneath your tape. The other way you can do that is some people I know use aluminum foil, which also can be adjusted to the roughness of your bark. You will need to periodically check your sticky barrier and make sure that it's still sticking and refresh it when needed, because the ants will be paying attention, I assure you. In order for your barrier to be effective, branches must be pruned so that they don't touch the ground, fences, or other structures. Ants are very canny. If there's a way to get into the tree, they've got the will. Snails and slugs, ugh. They create irregular holes with smooth edges on leaves and flowers by scraping it with their raspy, nasty tongues. They feed on both foliage and fruit, and among fruit trees are particularly fond of citrus. Not sure if it's a snail or slug? Look for silvery mucus trails to confirm that slugs or snails caused the damage and not some other pest. A good snail and slug management program relies on a combination of methods. The first step is to eliminate shelter. So you want to find all the places where snails and slugs can hide during the day. Piles of boards, stones, debris, weedy areas, ivy. You want to clear that out so that the snails and slugs don't have a nearby place to hide. Then you go out and you hunt them. Hunting them is best done after a rain or in a watered area and in the late afternoon, early evening. Wear gloves, take a bag and pop them into the bag and throw them into the trash. Not my favorite activity. You'll need to do it daily at the outset if you're having a particular problem, and then perhaps weekly as time goes on. You can also trap them, create nice places for them to hang out so that you can pick them up and throw them away. Create your own debris pile. An overturned melon works very well. You turn over the melon in the evening, pick up the snails and slugs, throw them in the trash. I've also used with some effectiveness a saucer filled with beer, or if your husband is grumpy about it, you can do some yeast and some sugar in a water that will create an environment that will attract them, and then they will drown. Barrier is another choice. Some people have some very good success with a copper strip, at least 2 inches wide. You put it slightly underground so that they can't get underneath it. Supposedly the copper reacts with their mucousy bodies and creates an electrical charge that they don't like. Some people also put a barrier layer of diacetomous earth. As long as it's kept dry, it will dry out any snails or slugs that try to cross across it. Baits can be a good part of your management program, but you need to be careful to check carefully what is the main ingredient in the bait that you've selected. Iron phosphate baits, which appear under various trade names like Sluggo or Slug Magic, have the advantage of being safe around children, domestic animals, and other wildlife. Some formulations are also listed as being acceptable for use in organic systems. They interfere with the ability of snails and slugs to feed, and so they do take some time to work. It may take several days to a week for the snails to die. So you're not going to see a pile of shells that lead you to suspect that your management technique is working well. And another similar product contains ferric sodium, and it takes a little bit shorter time, 3 days as opposed to 7 days, but it is not labeled for organic use. What you need to be careful about using are baits that contain the active ingredient metaldehyde. Baits are particularly poisonous to dogs and cats, and the pelleted form can actually be attracted to dogs. And so you don't want to use it any place where children or pets can have access to the bait. And also be careful about using it in any area where you are going to be eating the vegetables or anything that it may come in contact with. Ground squirrels, gophers, mice, and even rats enjoy citrus now and again. If you see extensive bite marks like you can see on this orange, your perpetrator may have 4 legs and sharp incisors. What to do? You can try exclusion, fencing around your garden and extending below ground. Our garden in Walnut Creek has an electrified fence, which worked very well until lately when a mischievous someone cut a hole in it. If you have mega problems with gophers in your yard, you may want to build a cage around the root area of your tree when you first plant it. You'll need to look into it carefully and make sure that there's enough room for the roots to come out when they do spread out. But a more mature tree is going to be able to deal with chewing on by gophers than is a baby tree. So this may be something that you want to look into if you have a significant gopher problem and want to plant a tree or two. Trapping is another choices. There are many kinds and brands of rodent traps and all sorts of opinions and advice on the best places to situate them and whether or not to bait them and with what. And I don't have enough time to do a full talk about trapping rodents. My favorite control is natural control. Predators such as owls, snakes, dogs, cats, and coyotes love rodents. It's worthwhile to set up owl boxes to see if you can attract one to your yard. I'm very lucky to own a cat who is a very effective and enthusiastic rodent hunter. Luckily, he's not particularly interested in birds. Note that gophers can be poisoned with bait put into their tunnel systems, but but that above ground poison bait is illegal and ineffective and may expose pets and non-target wildlife such as raptors and owls. And it is very strongly discouraged besides being illegal. The Asian citrus psyllid. This is a more serious problem than the other pests I've discussed. The Asian citrus psyllid is a tiny mottled brown insect about the size of an aphid with brownish mottled wings. The adult form feeds with its head down and its tail in the air. And you can see this over here on the left-hand side. The nymphs are tiny, see there, and they're yellowish, and they excrete white waxy tubules, and they're also curly. They feed on young citrus tree leaves. They deform the leaves by twisting and curling them. But the Asian citrus psyllid isn't a problem because of the damage it does to our citrus trees or to the citrus leaves. The Asian citrus psyllid is problematic because it spreads a disease called Wong Long Bing, or citrus greening. Wong Long Bing can kill a citrus tree in as little as 5 years. And there is no known cure or remedy. I'm sorry, I need to fix my lighting. It's getting darker and darker in here. All commonly grown citrus varieties are susceptible to this pathogen, including some plants like the curry plant that I showed you earlier. The psyllid takes the bacteria into its body when it feeds on any tree that's affected by citrus greening or Wong Long Bing. It then spreads the disease when the bacteria-carrying psyllid flies to a healthy plant and injects the bacteria into it as it's feeding. Wong Long Bing has decimated the commercial citrus industry in Florida. In 2008, the Asian citrus psyllid was first detected in California. The psyllid has spread throughout Southern California, particularly in urban and suburban environments, but also in commercial groves. The psyllid has since expanded its range to the Central Valley and Central Coast and has been found as far north as the San Francisco Bay Area. Wong Long Bing has also been detected in California, and strong efforts are made to protect our citrus industry. And the best way and the only way to protect our trees is to prevent the spread of the Wong Long Bing pathogen. So again, you want to purchase trees from local reputable nurseries to avoid bringing Asian citrus psyllid or Wong Long Bing into your yard. Look for this bright blue quarantine tag. All of Contra Costa County is in Zone 2, as shown here. Do not take any trees from this area outside of Contra Costa County, because we also want to protect, of course, the citrus industry in California. Make sure you also know the source of any plant grafts. The first Wong Long Bing infected tree found in California is believed to have been the result of an illegal graft. Check your trees monthly for the citrus psyllid. Distorted leaves can result from many causes, but what you're looking for is the waxy tubules and the yellow nymphs. And you can also see they have these little tiny little red eyes. They are very small. So in order to do this, you will need to use a hand lens. If you think your tree has Wong Long Bing, or if you find the Asian citrus psyllid, call the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Exotic Pest Hotline at 1-800-491-1899. Wow, we have covered a lot of things about citrus during this presentation. And at the very end, I would like to ask Serenity for just one more poll, as I'd like to know what has been the most interesting thing about this citrus talk.
Okay, we have people answering the poll. We're still at over 300 participants, so we'll give it a minute here. Well, we certainly have a leader, a runaway leader here, and I'll share the poll with you, but it's watering, fertilizing, and caring for your citrus, as you can see here.
Okay, thank you so very much for your input. As always, you know, we offer you the ability to visit our UC Master Gardener Program of Contra Costa website for lots of resources about your garden information. Follow us on social media at CocoMGUC on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you live in Contra Costa County, please email our help desk with your gardening questions. Tonight's and all our prior programs are posted on our YouTube channel after the live program date. We hope that you also join us for another webinar this year. Here is our listing of our upcoming webinar programs. You can also find information on those on our website. Registration is typically posted sometime the week prior to the event on our website, social media, and e-newsletter. I have prepared a growing citrus handout that you can access. By using this QR code or link, there's a link in chat, and we'll give you a brief survey that we would ask you to fill out again. I know you've already done one survey, but we have another one for you. The handout will be available after you complete the survey via a link on the thank you page. Did I completely take your script part, Karen? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Robyn, so much. So this is a slightly new process for us. Before, you'd have to wait a week or two before you received your handout. But right after you take our short survey, you'll get a thank you page, and there's a link on that thank you page to click, and that will give you the handout. And I know Robyn has an excellent, extensive handout to go along with this webinar that will give you links to help you answer a lot of the questions that you have. We may not get to all of your questions tonight, but what I'd like to do right now is invite Susan and Elaine to come back on from behind the curtain, unmute yourselves. And I think the way I want to handle this last round of questions is more of a discussion, because some of them are kind of difficult to answer without actually looking at your citrus tree. So I think we want to put the brain trust together here and see if we can help with these questions. Obviously, lots of questions about yellow leaves, as we expected, as well as trees that have blossoms, but they keep dropping fruit. Or they drop the blossoms, and it doesn't result in a lot of fruit for the trees. So Susan and Elaine, if you can unmute, Elaine, if you could unmute. I know you get a lot of these questions at the help desk, and Robyn, I know you know the answers to many of these as well. But when the blossoms drop prematurely without setting fruit, what would you say is the most common problem?
Well, typically there's a June drop. The plants put out way more flowers than they can support fruit, and they might get a bunch of little tiny buds, and then typically a bunch of them drop off because the plant can only handle so much fruit production. So it's a pretty normal thing to have lots drop off.
Okay, thank you. So now this one viewer has noticed that for the past several years, they've had a bounty, big crops, and then early this year, nothing. So is citrus one of these crops that will alternate a bountiful year and then a less bountiful year? Which one of you has the answer to that? We're going to tag Susan.
Okay, I always equate it to the weather, that if we have a cold snap when it's setting flowers, or there's something is different, that's usually what causes this. I don't know, Robyn, what were you going to say?
Well, that was basically what I thought too. Like as with my poor Thai lime tree that had such an issue with the frost damage this year, I'm not expecting any fruit. It really depends. It depends, as we like to say. And a lot of times it depends on the weather conditions and the watering. Has something changed with your watering? It can be a number of things that cause the tree. Normally, I have not heard, I know what they're talking about. I'm having an issue with my persimmon tree about having a very heavy crop last year and nothing this year. But I haven't heard that so much with citrus, because citrus is more of a continuous process. You may have blossoms, tiny fruit, and larger fruit all on the tree all at the same time.
So a couple questions about whether it's better to grow Meyer lemon and citrus in a pot or in the ground.
I would say you're going to be more successful in the ground if you have adequate space. In a pot, it's always going to be sub-adequate. It's very difficult to keep plants happy in a pot because of outside temperatures. The soil will get hotter. Citrus needs to be in the sun, and that means your container is going to get really hot, and that's hard on roots. So if you have a choice, put it in the soil.
Great. So this is a new one. I haven't seen this question before. Are there any cross-pollination issues with having lemons and oranges growing close together?
Nope. The pollination affects the seeds. It's that next generation. And so if you were going to grow citrus from seed, you might want to worry about that. But that's how you get new kinds of citrus, as you cross two plants. So no problems.
Yeah, and Robyn mentioned that in her talk, that you don't necessarily want to go with seed because you're not exactly sure what you're going to get.
You'd have to be careful to make sure that the pollen that your tree received was from the one that you wanted to combine it with, and not that Thai lime, because the fruit is not going to be very good.
What causes citrus to have a thick rind?
I don't know that I've ever researched that. I know that when I have let my Meyer lemons go too long and they're like over-aged, they tend to be thicker rinds. So that would be one cause.
It could also be a function of your fertilization practices. I think if you fertilize too late in the year, you can inhibit your fruit quality. At least that's what I've read. I haven't had an issue with that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, better to plant bare root or potted trees? What has your experience been with potted versus bare root?
I don't know that I've ever seen a bare root citrus. They have such fine fibrous roots that I don't think they would survive being bare root.
Yeah, this is Elaine. So, sorry, I got stuck out of Zoom. But yes, I've never seen citrus as bare root.
Neither have I. And I've been very successful planting bare root stone fruit and grapevines, but I've never seen a bare root citrus either.
Yeah,
Thank you.
they're not deciduous, so these are evergreen. So
Right. So yeah, that would be an issue. Okay, I have a medium-sized lemon tree that's been on the south side of my house for 40 years, and it's never produced more than a handful of lemons. Lots of questions related to, I don't even know what this tree is because it's never produced fruit. Can I tell by the leaves if it's an orange or it's a lemon? What do I do to get these lemons and citrus to produce fruit?
I would say do all those things that Robyn suggested in her talk.
I would also look
Yes.
out for, it may be, we have a citrus tree out at our garden that is not producing fruit. And one of the gardeners suggested that perhaps it has an overabundance of water sprouts in it. And that maybe some judicious pruning may, selecting for less vigorous growth within the tree may cause it to produce more fruit. But there's been lots of theories on. I've heard some wild suggestions about getting your citrus trees to produce.
Okay, we are out of time, and we haven't tackled all the questions, but although a lot of them are very, very similar, so I do encourage you to go on to our survey, either the link that's in chat that Serenity has put in the chat for you, or use the QR code to take the survey. And then when you get to the thank you page, click on that. Lots of great information on this handout to help you answer some of those questions. But it all comes down to, it just depends. It could be water, it could be heat, it could be cold, it could be sun, who knows? So you know your tree better than we do. And I hope that tonight's program has been helpful for you. Thank you so much, Robyn, Susan, Elaine, and from behind the scenes, Serenity with Contra Costa Library, and Lori Palmquist on our live stream. Good night.